Testing. Hi, it's me, Tarina. Hi, it's me, Cozy. Welcome to the Word of the Day podcast. Here's your host, Uncle Jamie. Here's your host, Uncle Jamie.
Wow, thank you for that very kind introduction. Yes, indeed, this is your host, Jamie Silva, Uncle Jamie to Cozy and Tabina here, and you are listening to the annual Christmas episode of the Word of the Day podcast, where useful words are pleasantly explained. Now, we realize this episode is going out well after Christmas, but that's due to circumstances beyond the show's control, so we won't apologize for it. Anyway, so joining me today to help pleasantly explain today's word, please welcome to the program for his first appearance, the talented voice actor, John. John, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here, Jamie. I can't wait to hear which Christmas word we're going to feature. Is it Yule or Nog? Perhaps wassail? Or no, wait, don't tell me. It's hark, isn't it?
No, none of those, John. To be clear, it's not a Christmas word exactly. It's more that the word has a conceptual connection to Christmas.
That doesn't sound nearly so festive.
Well, it's what I've prepared, so...
Well, tidings of comfort and conceptual connection to you, too.
Don't be a Grinch, John.
A Grinch? I'm the one who wants to talk about hark.
Okay, fine. We can talk about hark. But later, okay? Like at the end of the show?
Sounds great. Hark, everybody.
That's not exactly how you use it, John. Again, we'll cover it later. Okay, so folks, it's very fitting that some nieces handled the introduction today because the main word we're going to feature is the adjective avuncular. I would say this means of or pertaining to an uncle, or relatedly, possessing the qualities of an uncle.
Google's definition of avuncular is very simple. It goes, quote, relating to an uncle, unquote. And to be clear, that does not refer to an uncle's relatives. It's the quality of referring to or being about or connected to an uncle in some way.
Most commonly, I think, avuncular refers to men of any age, I suppose, but I think more likely somewhat older men, maybe like 50 or above, who behave in a kindly, affectionate, probably doting fashion towards children. And just FYI, doting, per Merriam-Webster, means, quote, lavish or excessive in one's attention, fondness, or affection.
Now, avuncular men may be uncles themselves, but not necessarily. And the children in question may be their own nieces and nephews, but again, not necessarily. Also, men don't even have to be interacting with children at that time, or be known to interact with children regularly in order to be described as avuncular. They might just seem like the sort of man who, if he did interact with kids, would be nice to them and get along well with them.
The bottom line, folks, is that if a guy is good with kids, then avuncular may be a good way to describe him and or his behavior. Merriam-Webster's primary definition of avuncular tells us a bit more about what an avuncular personality or avuncular behavior might look like. It goes, quote, suggestive of an uncle, especially in kindliness or geniality, unquote. And geniality is just the noun form of the adjective genial, which means friendly and cheerful.
Which makes sense, right? Uncles are typically kind and pleasant to kids, or at least they're supposed to be. Hence, men who are kind and pleasant in general might remind you of an uncle, either one of your uncles or just the stereotypical uncle figure, and might therefore be described as avuncular.
Continuing this exploration of what constitutes avuncular behavior, I think avuncular men tend to be smiley, even jovial.
They're also fond of chuckling and dropping their G's and saying things like, hey, champ, or howdy, sport, or how's the world's cutest 6-year-old today, huh?
While this could just be them covering for the fact that they've forgotten the kid's name, these greetings are also clearly avuncular, in that they're cheery and smiley and sort of buddy-buddy. Like, oh, sure, I may be an adult and you may be a kid, but we can still be great friends. Next up in the avuncular qualities list, I would say, and this may be a stretch, but I think avuncular guys are less likely to be thin, because the qualities of jollity and joviality and chuckling a lot are usually associated with, how shall I say, somewhat heavier set or rotund men.
Rotund?
Yeah, portly, stout, basically a bit overweight is what I'm saying.
I see. Okay. So avuncular men are jolly, rotund, fond of kids, and on the older side. Well, Jamie, that sort of feels like we're just describing Santa Claus.
That's right, John. Santa Claus is like the prototypical, best-known avuncular pop culture figure I can think of. Which, surprise, that is the Christmas tie-in for this episode.
The conceptual connection between Christmas and this episode?
Mm-hmm.
What does conceptual even mean, though?
You know, conceptual, concept. Like a concept is basically an idea, and conceptual is an adjective that means relating to ideas, as opposed to concrete things.
Things like Santa Claus?
Well, more like the idea of Santa Claus. The whole Santa Claus concept.
Yeah, I'm still confused.
Sorry, John. Yeah, folks, this is why I don't say conceptual very often. It's way too much of a conceptual concept.
Is this supposed to be helping?
You know what? Forget I said anything. Back to the thread here. In my opinion, you just can't get any more avuncular than Santa Claus. So folks, if you want a simple way to remember what avuncular is all about, just think to yourself, oh, it means kind of like Santa. This isn't perfect, but it's pretty darn close.
And don't forget the Santa laugh. I feel like that's one of the most jolly avuncular things about him.
It is. And to see what we're talking about, here's a Santa explaining how to do an authentic Santa laugh.
What do you mean, Santa? Don't you mean the Santa?
Yes. Yes, I do, John. Thank you for clarifying that. What you're about to hear, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is the Santa Claus.
Wow, Santa took your call? Isn't he pretty busy this time of year?
No, yeah, John, he is tough to get a hold of for sure, but hey, we got lucky. Because actually, we have an elf on staff here at the show.
Seriously?
Well, sure. Elves make great employees, you see, because they're super productive, they have a great attitude, and they're willing to work for a pittance in the hopes of being called up to the big leagues.
Oh, you mean Santa's workshop?
That's right. It's practically impossible to get a job there, you know. Like, they won't even look at an elf's application unless they've got 15 years of gift wrapping experience and can present several recommendation letters, attesting to their lifetime of unstoppable goodwill and seasonal cheer, no matter the season.
Dang, that's pretty exclusive. I hear a degree from the most prestigious elf university can help set you apart, though.
Oh? What university is that?
Cornell.
Oh, hey, yeah, Cornell. That's actually where our on-staff elf went to school. Majored in wreaths and ornaments, with a minor in medieval Dutch caroling.
I'd love an introduction, actually. What's his name?
Anderson Kane. Goes by Andy, though.
So he goes by Andy Kane?
Andy Kane, that's right. Anyway, so here's the Santa Claus explaining how to do a genuine, thoroughly avuncular Santa laugh.
My belly laugh starts actually in my mind, because it's the happiness and the joy that brings that laugh. That synapse of my brain goes down to my belly. Together with my mind and my spirit, it comes out. Ho, 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 Always laugh. Best medicine you can find.
Wow, that is just aggressively jolly.
Yeah, it's almost intimidating. Just so much raw, unfiltered joy.
For sure. Pretty avuncular though, right?
Extremely avuncular. Now, for something a bit less overwhelmingly merry, let's turn to another well-known avuncular person, the renowned American television newsman Walter Cronkite, who was apparently known for having an exceptionally avuncular TV presence.
Here's what vocabulary.com has to say in its article on the word avuncular, lightly edited for clarity. Quote, as Cronkite narrated the major events of the day, he brought a personal touch, and his warm, comforting delivery was swiftly recognized as avuncular. He was Uncle Walter to many viewers who had never met him, but still felt a familial connection as the evening news was beamed into America's living rooms. No surprise, then, that Google News turns up nearly 500 articles in the few days after Cronkite's passing in 2009 that describe him as avuncular. Unquote.
To be clear, folks, avuncularity, which that's the noun form, the state or quality of being avuncular, is about a lot more than your voice. It's about your whole comportment, behavior, and personality.
Very true, John. But insofar as your voice might be part of your avuncularity, I think I'd expect it to be somewhat on the deeper side, resonant, mellifluous, and sound kind of like the speaker is smiling.
I would also say that an avuncular man's phrasing should be simple, clear, and unpretentious. All right, let's take a listen to Mr. Cronkite broadcasting the first moonwalk in 1969.
Good morning. Man is about to launch himself on a trip to the moon. From this Florida launch complex, it seemed that the whole world stopped. This man set out on the adventure to escape from his own planet and to set foot on a distant one. Man on the moon. Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
Well, for thousands of years now, it's been man's dream to walk on the moon. Right now, after seeing it happen, knowing that it happened, it still seems like a dream.
Well, I don't know about you, John, but I can hear the avuncularity for sure. And folks, if you see the video, which we'll put a link to in the show notes, Cronkite's facial expression is like, ah, shucks, how about that? People in space, who'da thunk it? That sort of folksiness is very much in line with the unassuming, extremely approachable demeanor that avuncular men typically sport.
Okay, let's move along to another usage note for avuncular. This comes to us courtesy of the excellent radio program / podcast, Away with Words, hosted by Martha Barnett and Grant Barrett. Here is a snippet of what they had to say about avuncular.
So on the uncle side, when we say avuncular, we don't always mean exactly like an uncle. We mean jovial, friendly, kind of goofy,
right.
Maybe telling little silly jokes.
Kindly to younger
spoiling
people.
a little bit,
Yeah.
but not overly invested in anyone else's happiness.
Goofy seems legit, since making kids laugh is a great way to get along with them, and kids are like the prime demographic for goofy humor. Next, per Google, indulgent means, quote, having or indicating a tendency to be overly generous to or lenient with someone, unquote. So that fits with the idea that uncles, or avuncular men, might be nice to kids to the point of spoiling them a little bit.
Interesting. Personally, I wouldn't say that indulgent means you're overly generous or lenient with someone. What about just a normal, nice amount of generosity or leniency?
Said like a real uncle, Jamie.
Well, what's wrong with that? You're an uncle too, right?
Indeed. I've got 2 nephews and 2 nieces, ages ranging from 6 to 1.5.
That's nice.
What?
Oh, nothing.
How many do you have?
Well, let's see here. I've got 7 nieces, 2 nephews, and 1 more on the way.
First off, it's not a competition, Jamie. You know that.
Yeah, no, I do. It's not.
And second, it's not a fair competition. You have way more siblings than me.
Well, it is what it is. Anyway, I think we're getting off track. John, would you say that you're indulgent with your nieces and nephews?
I guess.
Okay, so do you think you're, spoiling them by being, quote-unquote, overly generous? Or are you just being friendly and fun and cool, right? Like a cool uncle.
Jamie, quibble with the Google definition if you want, but Merriam-Webster agrees that the word indulgent implies that you're overdoing it, at least a little bit. Quote, willing to allow excessive leniency, generosity, or consideration, unquote.
Well, fine. What about that last part, then? That avuncular implies that as an uncle, you're not invested in anyone else's happiness. Like, what is that? How insulting. I feel like I'm very invested in my nieces and nephews' happiness.
First off, Jamie, again, you're sounding very defensive.
Well, I feel attacked.
And second, I think what the hosts are saying is that while uncles might love their nieces and nephews very much, they're not responsible for them, really. Uncles don't have to attend to their education, whether academic or moral. They don't have to discipline them if they're unruly or whatever. And just overall, they're probably not nearly so invested in the kids' lives as their parents are. And furthermore, one might say that if you actually had these responsibilities as an uncle, then you couldn't be avuncular anymore. You couldn't be fun and cool and indulgent all the time, because you'd be trying to actually raise the kids.
Wow, that's like a paradox or something. At minimum, it feels profound. Nice one, John.
Thank you.
Now, some folks might ask, logically, whether there is an aunt equivalent of avuncular that means of or pertaining to an aunt, or reminiscent of stereotypical aunt behavior or personality. As it happens, there is such a word, maternal. But I'm afraid that nobody says this word at all. I don't know if it was ever widespread, but it's certainly in desuetude now. Desuetude being a word we covered in episode 100, meaning basically a state of disuse. Okay, it's now time to get a couple examples of how to use avuncular in ordinary conversation or writing. John, go ahead and lead us off.
Example number 1. Sam, an economics professor by trade, combined the avuncular practice of pretending to find quarters behind kids' ears with the very unavuncular advice that they invest those quarters in inflation-protected treasury securities instead of blowing it on candy and video games.
Example number 2 continues the financial theme as it comes from a New York Times article published in April 2009 about Bernie Madoff, who famously stole billions of dollars from unsuspecting investors. Quote, Bernie Madoff, with his avuncular charm, gave individual investors the sense of being part of an extended family, unquote. Notice here, folks, that avuncular men can appear kind and trustworthy to adults, not just kids.
And finally, example number 3 comes from the novel The Intrusion of Jimmy by the British author P.G. Wodehouse. The following selection tells of a man with a bit of a gambling problem, who had always relied on his rich uncle to supply him with funds when he started running low. Quote, "There is a game called poker, at which a man without much control over his features may exceed the limits of the handsomest allowance. His lordship's face during a game of poker was like the surface of some quiet pond, ruffled by every breeze. The blank despair of his expression when he held bad cards made bluffing expensive. The honest joy that bubbled over in his eyes when his hand was good acted as an efficient danger signal to his grateful opponents. 2 weeks of poker had led to his writing to his uncle a distressed but confident request for more funds, and the avuncular foot had come down with a joyous bang. Taking his stand on the evils of gambling, his uncle had changed the conditions of the money market for his nephew, with a thoroughness that effectively prevented the possibility of the youth's being again caught by the fascinations of poker. The allowance vanished absolutely." Unquote.
The relevant phrase in that selection, once again, is "the avuncular foot had come down," which is a fancy way of saying that the protagonist's uncle put his foot down, i.e. he stopped putting up with/enabling his nephew's irresponsible spendthrift ways. This is an example of how avuncular can modify or describe all sorts of uncle-related things. In this context, you could have said that the avuncular wallet was shut, the avuncular patience was exhausted, the avuncular indulgence was at an end, etc. Okay, now, John, because I am an indulgent, avuncular sort of podcast host, very much like Santa Claus actually, if he hosted a podcast, I've decided to grant your request to talk about Hark.
Yes! It's a Christmas miracle!
Now, folks, Hark is pretty much only ever seen or heard of in the popular Christmas carol, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. This line being a reference to the angels proclaiming the news of Jesus' birth to the shepherds.
Hark is an archaic word that basically functioned as a way to get people's attention. Google defines it simply as listen, while Merriam-Webster goes with pay close attention.
So if you tell someone to hark, or to use the long version, hearken, you're basically telling them to check this out, or stop what you're doing and listen up.
Now, getting back to the song Hark the Herald Angels Sing, you might ask, who is Harold the Angel, and why did he get this plum announcement job? Well, the confusion stems from the fact that the name Herald, spelled Harold, is pronounced the same way as the noun/verb herald, Herald.
And just FYI, we're not going to talk about the verb form here, because it's too off topic and we got to wrap up this here show. Herald, the noun in the sense used in this song, means per Google, quote, an official messenger bringing news, unquote. And this plum announcement job, as you put it, John, of being a herald, it was kind of a big deal way back when. And here to tell us more about the fascinating profession of heraldry, please welcome to the show our resident heraldry expert, Mary. And by the way, she's an expert because she's currently reading a whole book about heraldry, which is a lot more than most people can say. Mary, all yours.
Thank you, Jamie. In medieval Europe, heralds were also known as officers of arms. That's like government officials. And they bore the heraldic insignia of their lord or employer. They often served as military envoys, conveying messages between opposing army commanders. The original diplomats, you might say. Heralds also played a major role at medieval tournaments, where they organized, announced, and refereed the jousts. You know, those battles between knights who try to knock each other off their horses with jousting spears, known as lances. These days, of course, opposing army commanders don't need envoys, and jousting referee jobs are rare outside of the occasional Renaissance fair. Heralds, however, are still around, just doing different things. Mostly they're sort of niche historians specializing in the study and preservation of heraldic traditions. Heraldry itself, as it once was in the days of yore, and as it is now, both in practice and in study, is a system of emblems or visual symbols that represent a family or individual. Basically their own private logo, which often featured a Latin motto as well, so a slogan. Rather corporate, actually. Anyway, if you've ever seen those medieval shields with lions and eagles and Latin phrases on them, that's what I'm talking about. Those emblems, which you might also hear referred to as coats of arms, heraldic arms, a family crest, or just a crest, they would represent a particular individual, a lord of some sort most often. So most modern quasi-historian heralds could tell you all about who wore each one and when, and what every detail of the crest means, from colors and shapes to animals and mottos. Unsurprisingly, they have fancy jargon for everything. For example, a stag, which is a male deer, or a bear standing on its hind legs would be described as rampant, but statent if it had all its legs down, and passant if it had just one leg raised. Now, if all this heraldry talk has you hankering for your own coat of arms, good news. It's still possible for citizens of some countries to apply for a family crest of their very own. Although, of course, applying for a crest doesn't mean you'll get one. The people in charge of handing out crests are very picky, and there are strict rules about who can display or inherit them, and whether or how to modify or merge the coats of arms of two families or houses together. The Tudor Rose of England, for example, is a white rose inside a red rose, symbolizing the joining of House Lancaster and House York and the ending of England's War of the Roses, which I think is kind of romantic. In one final throwback to their medieval duties, heralds are occasionally still used for official proclamations in some European countries. But you don't have to be a certified herald to make such proclamations. Great Britain is actually home to a self-proclaimed herald by the name of Tony Appleton, who has taken it upon himself to publicly announce any major changes in the British royal family, including births, engagements, and obviously marriages. In YouTube videos, which we will link to in the show notes, you can see him in what appears to be rather flouncy 18th century dress, complete with a tricorn hat and a clanging bell. I'll leave you with a clip of Mr. Appleton in his element, announcing the birth of William and Kate's second child in May 2015.
Oh yay! Oh yay! Oh yay! On this day, the 2nd of May, in the year 2015, we welcome with humble duty the second born of the Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. The Princess is fourth in line to the throne. May our Princess be long-lived, happy and glorious, and one day long to reign over us. God save the Queen!
Oh, and just so you know, the word oye fills basically the same function as hark. It's just a way to say listen up. Okay, folks, that'll do it for us, and that'll do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening, and John, thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure, Jamie. So much fun.
Alrighty then, on behalf of everyone here at the Word of the Day podcast, from me to producer Pete to Andy Kane and the rest of the staff, we hope you had a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and we look forward to bringing you an abundance of fun and interesting words in 2021 and beyond.
Thanks for listening. Thanks everybody for listening.